Welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Management Studies, SOMS, Postgraduate Diploma in Financial Management, PGDI-FM. Semester 2, MMPF 004 Security Analysis and Portfolio Management. Block 1 An Overview. Unit 3 Risk and Return. 3.1 Introduction. In this unit, the concept of risk is discussed in detail because no investment decision can be taken without understanding the risk associated with the investment. The importance of risk in investment decision can be appreciated if you ask the investors why they invest one part of their savings in bonds and the other part in equity. If risk is not a relevant factor in investment decision, investors should bet all their savings only in equity stocks, which offer on average higher return than debt instruments. Investors not only like return, but they also dislike risk. Many investors may be willing to take some amount of risk since it is the only way to earn higher return, but they need compensation for taking such additional risk. Thus, investment decision not only requires an estimation of return but also an assessment of risk to find whether the return from a risky asset is adequate for the risk assumed by the investors. 3.2 Concept of risk. The word risk is common vocabulary and is widely used in the world of investments. In normal life, the term risk often means a negative outcome. If you say that it is risky to drive vehicle in a particular road, you actually mean that driving in that road may cause an accident. However, the term risk in investments has a different meaning. It not only refers to a scope of negative occurrence but also implies the chance of positive return. For example, that investment in stocks is riskier than investments in bond. It doesn't mean that investments in stocks will yield a negative return or it will be lower than bond return. It simply means that investments in stocks may offer a high return or also a huge loss. Risk captures variation in expected return and such uncertainty of return is invest in risky investments. The expected return needs to be higher. When such higher expected return is used for discounting the future cash flows, the security value tends to move downward. This way you can see a link between risk and return. Since investment decisions are made based on the expected future outcome, we can broadly classify our understanding and knowledge on future into 4 categories. These are X knowledge, X ignorance, X possible outcomes, X uncertainty. Knowledge. At one extreme, we have certain knowledge. If an investor invests in government security, it is almost certain that the government pays interest and principal on the due date. Only in extreme conditions, the government may fail to honor the commitment. Ignorance. At the other extreme, we have no idea on the future and we can call this as our ignorance. Suppose an organization comes out with a public issue stating that they will take up a research to develop a process that will convert iron into gold. Many of us may not be able to judge the outcome because we may not have any idea on the feasibility. No rational investment decision is feasible when we are ignorant of possible outcome. Possible outcomes. The third one is a situation where we know the possible outcomes and its range. Suppose we are able to estimate that his earning will grow by 30% if the economy does well and will decline by 10% if the economy fails. If we are able to know the probability of the economy doing well or failing, then the situation is called risky. For example, in the above case, if we know the probability of economy doing well next year is 70% and the probability of economy failing is 30%, then we can estimate A's earnings in a better way. Under this condition, the earnings of A will increase by 30% with 70% probability and decline by 10% with 30% probability. Uncertainty. If we don't know anything beyond a certain point, then the situation is called as uncertain. It is again difficult to take a rational investment decision in a situation of uncertainty. In other words, a situation pertaining to Future is considered as risky if we know the range of outcome and its probability distribution. Two elements in the concept of risk as applied to the world of investment and finance deserve attention. 1. Risk in the investment sense is associated with return. A person buys a financial asset with expectations of a return. The investment decision would be premised on an expected return, which may or may not actually be realized. The chance of an unexpected or adverse return would be the risk carried by an investment decision. For example, you buy a share at 370 expecting a dividend of 6 per share in the coming year, and expecting the price to rise to 450 in a year's time. You are basing your decision to buy on a return of 450 to 370, 6.0 upon 370 equals 23.2%. Now, the price may rise only to 380, in which case the actual return downs to a mere 4.2% if the organization comes out with a dividend of 6 per share on a 10 equity share. Should the dividend be pruned to 4 per share, the return would further fall to 3.3%. The other point to be stressed about investment risk is that it is generally considered synonymous with uncertainty. The investor is most of the time dealing with uncertainty and yet figuring out his subjective probabilities for the expected return. The risk zone in which the investor moves is characterized by stochastic knowledge, and his beliefs about the expected return enable him to work out a probability distribution of possible outcomes. This is illustrated in the paragraph that follows. Assume that you are interested in buying 1000 equity shares of an organization. The market price of a 10 rupee share is 200. The highest prices were 2020, 21, 135, 2021 22, 146, and 2022 23, 235. You expect the price to go up to 250 within a year of your purchase. The organization paid the following dividends: 2020-21, 23%, 2021-22, 30%, and 2022-23, 32%. There has been a liberal record of 5 bonuses in the past. The last bonus being in 2019-2020 in the ratio of 1:1. This information enables you to figure an expected return of 26.6% assuming that the organization will maintain the dividend of 32% in 2021-23 and that the price at the time of your sale will be 250. The expected return of 26.6% was derived as follows. The investor gets a dividend of 3.20 and a capital gain of 50 when he sells the stock at 250. The net gain of 53.20 for an investment of 200 works out to 26.6%. The figure you have estimated above is a single estimate of expected return. Since future is uncertain, you may have to examine the probability of several other possible returns. Thus, the expected return may be 20%, 30%, 35% or 10%. Now, you will have to assign the chances of occurrence of these alternative possible returns on the basis of your information and subjective beliefs. For example, you expect as shown in Table 3.1. Table 3.1, Probability Distribution. Possible return, Xi. Probability occurrence, P, Xi. 10% 0.10. 20% 0.20. 26.6% 0.40. 30% 0.20. 35% 0.10. You are clearly now not working on a point estimate. The earlier estimate of 26.6% is one of the 5 sets of outcomes you have generated. The table above is known as a probability distribution and you can use it to have an insight into the riskiness of your proposal to buy 1000 shares. The procedure would be as follows. I. Estimate the expected value of the 5 possible outcomes. If the possible returns are denoted by xi, and the related probabilities by p, xi. The expected value, EV, is EV equals sigma Ni equals 1 xi p xi. In other words, it is the sum of products of possible returns with their respective probabilities. You will be in a position to have some idea of risk by estimating the variability of possible outcomes from the expected value of outcomes that you have estimated in I above. A statistical procedure used for the purpose is the calculation of standard deviation, which is given as follows. Look at the screen. The above calculations can be repeated for several stocks, and if the investor's objective is to minimize risk, the one with minimum standard deviation can be selected. Suppose there is another stock which offers same expected return if 25.14%, but the standard deviation of return is lower than 0.0660. Then investors will prefer the new stock, which offer lower risk with same return. You may note that squared standard deviation, sigma 2, is known as variance, and is an equally useful measure of risk. 3.3 Systematic risk. Systematic risk, also known as, refers to the overall risk that is inherent in the entire market or an entire asset class, rather than being specific to a particular company or industry. It is also known as market risk or non-diversifiable risk. This type of risk cannot be eliminated through diversification, as it affects the entire market or asset class. Examples of systematic risk include economic recessions, political instability, inflation, interest rate fluctuations, and natural disasters. These factors can cause widespread market fluctuations that affect a large number of investments. Investors can manage systematic risk through asset allocation and diversification. By investing in a variety of assets across different sectors and industries, investors can minimize the impact of market fluctuations on their overall portfolio. However, they cannot completely eliminate systematic risk. Types of systematic risk. There are several reasons for the future return varying from the expected return, and we grouped them under two broad categories. Our discussion was more on measuring different components of risk, and now we will discuss more on understanding different sources of risk. There are different types of systematic risk. These are as follows: interest rate risk, market risk, inflation risk, purchasing power risk. Interest rate risk. To start with, we will discuss an important source of risk, namely interest rate risk, which affects every sector in the economy. Often government through RBI uses interest rates to push the economy forward or cool down the heated economy. Interest rate risk arises from variations in such rates, which cause changes in market prices. It can be seen that a rise in market interest rates causes a decline in market prices of securities and vice versa. There are different ways through which the interest rate affects the securities return. It affects the expected or required rate of return because investors always compare risk-free return with the expected return of an investment. An increase in interest rate will cause an increase in expected or required rate of return of other investments. Illustration. Assume a 14% secured non-convertible debenture of $200 for 5 years. As long as the market interest rate remains at 14%, the value of debenture will be equal to $200. Suppose the interest rate in the market increases to 20%, it affects the prices of debenture because an investor, who is willing to buy the debenture, would expect a return of 20% and hence discount the cash flows at 20%. Solution. Look at the screen. The debenture price will decline from $200 to 164.11. Interest rate risk affects largely the securities with longer duration. For instance, if there is another non-convertible debenture with 10-year maturity, its price would decline to 149.69 from 200 if the interest rate increases from 14% to 20%. The workings are as follows. Now let us know how the interest rate risk affects stock price. Since stocks have no maturity, the interest rate changes affect the stock prices more than bonds. Secondly, increase in interest rates also reduces the profit of the companies and hence securities prices are negatively affected. It can now be stated that the market prices, or present values, of securities would be inversely related both to market interest rates, or yield to maturity, and duration. You will recognize that the interest rate risk is the price fluctuation risk, which the investor is likely to face when interest rates change. With a view to avoid the interest rate and duration risk, the investor may like to invest in short-term securities. Rather than buying a 5-year debenture, he may buy a 1-year security every time the earlier 1-year security matures. This strategy, though successful in reducing the interest rate or the price fluctuation, would possibly expose the investor to another risk. Even the coupon rates in successive short-term securities may vary and the range of variation may be wide too. Market risk. You would have observed that the market moves upward at some point of time and then moves downward at some other point of time. Such movements may happen despite the good or bad performance of the companies. Often, organizations' management and its employees will be puzzled why the market fluctuates like this. Irrespective of our understanding, the reality is the market move in one of the two directions, upward or downward, and once such trend starts, it exists for a time. There are several reasons behind such movements. These can be changes in economy or expectation about the future of the economy may cause such widespread movement. Organization-specific news may also cause such movement, and if the organization is a major one like any of the blue-chip organizations, a positive or negative development may generally affect several other stocks in the market. Similarly, a shock in the US market may have an impact on domestic stock prices. Investors' psychology also often contributes to the market risk. For instance, negative news may create a panic in the market and everyone would like to sell the stock without any buyer in the market. In this process, the market will decline more than the desired level. Market risk is demonstrated by the increased variability of investor returns due to alternating bouts to bull and bear phases. Efforts to minimize this component of total investment risk require a fair anticipation of a particular phase. This needs an understanding of the basic cause for the two market phases. It has been found that business cycles are a major determinant of the timing and extent of the bull and bear market phases. This would suggest that the ups and downs in securities markets would follow the cycle of expansion and recession in the economy. A bear market triggers pessimism and price falls on an extensive scale. There is empirical evidence which suggests that it is difficult for investors to avoid losing in bear markets barring exceptions. The question of protection against market risk naturally arises. Investors can protect their portfolios by withdrawing invested funds before the onset of the bear market. A simple rule to follow would be, buy just before the security prices rise in a bull market and sell just before the onset of the bear market. That is, buy low and sell high. This is called good investment timing but often difficult to practice. Market risk, as pointed out earlier, is also classified as systematic and non-systematic. When combinations of systematic forces cause the majority of shares to rise during a bull market and fall during a bear market, a situation called systematic market risk is created. As already noted, a minority of securities would be negatively correlated to the prevailing market trend. These unsystematic securities face diversifiable market risk. For example, organizations granted a valuable patent of obtaining a profitable additional Market share might find its share prices rising even when overall gloom prevails in the market. Such unsystematic price fluctuations are diversifiable, and the securities facing them can be combined with some other shares so that the resulting diversified portfolio offsets the non-systematic losses by gains from other systematic securities. Inflation risk, purchasing power risk. Inflation risk is the variability in the total purchasing power of an asset. It arises from the rising general price level, the interest rate on bonds and debentures, and dividend rates on equity and preference shares are stated in money terms, and if the general price level rises during some future period, the buying power of the cash interest, dividend income is likely to be received for that period would decline. And if the rate of inflation is equal to the money rate of return, the investor does not add anything to his existing wealth since he obtains a zero rate of return. Many investors believe that if the market prices of their financial assets increase, they are financially better off in spite of inflation. Their argument is, after all, money is increasing. This is nothing but money illusion. Consider, for instance, a situation when the market price of a security you are holding doubles and the general price level increases fourfold. Would you say that you are richer simply because your command over money doubles by selling the security? True, you get more money than what you had earlier, but you can buy less with that money. You can't dismiss the fact that your command over goods and services, which is the eventual objective of all investment decisions, has declined due to a fourfold rise in prices in general. The money illusion is partly rectified by obtaining real rates of return, interest, dividend, cash income, capital gains, that is equivalent to the inflation-adjusted monetary or nominal rates of return. If the real rate of return is denoted by RR, inflation rate by Q, coupon rate by R, and nominal rate of return by R, then look at the screen. The above examples clearly highlight the effects of purchasing power risk on the wealth and returns of an investor. A question is sometimes asked about negative real rates of returns, that is, a situation where the inflation rate exceeds the nominal rate. Should an investor stop investing in such situations? The answer would depend on what other alternatives the investor would have in the event of not investing. If the money withheld from investment is kept as idle cash with zero nominal return, then investing even with negative real returns may be advisable because, as shown in the example below, non-investment would yield a larger negative real return than investing. And even though normal investment objectives would be to earn positive real rates, in abnormal situations like the one stated above, the objective would be to reduce the negative real rate of return. Assume that a security is expected to yield a nominal rate of return of 12%, and the rate of inflation is expected to be 15%. We have now to work out the choices of the investor, further assuming that if he does not invest, his cash will have to remain idle. Now, if a hypothetical investor decides to invest, his real rate of return would be equals 1 equals 1 equals 0.9741.0 equals 0.026. It works out to a negative 2.6% return. Should the investor decide to keep idle cash, the real rate of return would be equals 1 equals 1 equals 0.869 minus 1.0 equals minus 0.131. It would be better to have a negative return of 2.6 than to end with a negative return of 13.1% by keeping cash idle. You have seen that the purchasing power risk arises even if the market prices of assets rise. Likewise, this risk may emerge even if the asset prices do not fluctuate. The reason for these relationships is that the purchasing power risk arises from fluctuations in the purchasing power of real income and/or real price of assets and not from fluctuations in buying power of their nominal income and/or nominal prices. It has already been stated that investment assets are real assets like land, real estate, gold, diamonds, and financial or monetary assets like shares, bonds, and debentures. It has been observed that prices of real assets move with inflation and are positively correlated with it. In contrast, prices of monetary assets are relatively rigid and are negatively correlated with inflation. In consequence, real assets do not lose purchasing power, as do the monetary assets in periods of inflation. In other words, real assets are good inflation hedges, but monetary assets are not. Hence, monetary assets cannot form part of a portfolio which already has got a high degree of purchasing power risk. Such a portfolio can be diversified with real assets. Activity 2. Collect monthly data of movements in the BSE 100 index for the last few years. Plot them on a graph with months and years on the horizontal scale and index levels on the vertical scale. Read the resulting graph and point out A. Know of peaks. B. Know of troughs. C. Duration of all peaks and troughs. D. Average duration of all peaks and troughs. 3.4 Unsystematic risk. Unsystematic risk, also known as specific risk or diversifiable risk, refers to the risk that is specific to a particular company, industry, or asset. It is the opposite of systematic risk, which affects the entire market or asset class. Examples of unsystematic risk include company management issues, supply chain disruptions, labor strikes, product recalls, and legal liabilities. These factors can affect the performance of a specific company or industry without necessarily impacting the broader market. Investors can reduce unsystematic risk through diversification. By investing in a range of assets across different companies and industries, investors can spread their risk and reduce their exposure to any single company or industries. Specific risk. This helps to minimize the impact of negative events on an investor's overall portfolio. Types of unsystematic risk. There are different types of unsystematic risks. These include X financial risk, X business risk, X management risk. Financial risk. The default risk arises from a deterioration of financial strength of the organization that issues securities. Holders of such securities have to experience greater variability of returns when financial strength begins to worsen. Since the basic parameter is financial health, default risk is also known as financial risk. Financial risk arises when the organization uses debt in its capital structure. Debt brings fixed liability and hence increases the variability of income available to the equity shareholders. Use of debt is not always bad. It will increase the profitability when the organization performs well in equity. Holders get a return more than what is available otherwise. Debt creates problem in bad times because of the fixed liability. If the organization fails to meet the debt obligation, the managers need to spend a lot of time in convincing the lenders to accept delayed payment and in meanwhile lose valuable managerial time. Default easily spread bad words about the organization and the organization faces problem from several fronts. It may not be able to get credit from suppliers and some of the good workers may leave the organization. Customers will also prefer companies with sound financials to avoid uncertainty in supply. The impact of financial risk up to a limit is restricted only to the equity holders. But too much of debt creates problems even to existing debt security holders. Unless the debt is fully secured. Even in such cases, it is difficult to take charge of the assets and sell it to meet their liability in view of lengthy legal process. If not handled properly, the default episodes of an organization may as well finally end up in bankruptcy. This would, however, not be quite a swift process, and one may notice warning signals before the final disaster strikes. For example, an organization may begin stopping payment of its bills, accumulate arrears of cumulative preference dividends and accrued interest on loans, default on debenture interest, incur persistent losses, slash the equity dividend, and finally skip it, and so on. In more objective terms, adverse movements in financial ratios like the current ratio, the asset test ratio, the cash to operating expense ratio, the net worth to total assets ratio, and so on can be put on the watch. The point is that bankruptcy will not be a bolt from the blue except when an act of nature destroys all assets, which are not insured. Organizations operating in the financial services sector like CRISIL, CARE, and ICRA undertake an ongoing exercise to provide quality ratings to the debt instruments of issuing companies. They are at present being solicited in India by companies who want to raise funds from the capital market. In Western countries, the rating program is a voluntary and continual exercise, performed by eminent organizations like Standard. When the first sign of a weakening financial health of an organization is noticed, market price of its security reacts and takes a deep. The price decline will be equal to the estimated loss when the organization goes into bankruptcy. The immediate target groups would be lenders and loan creditors, but ultimately, even shareholders would suffer. In fact, if the worst happens, losses of equity holders could be total and they may end up with share prices nearly dropping to zero. Also, even at such abysmally low levels, there may not be any takers. As with other risk factors, there may be diversifiable and non-diversifiable components of default risk. Thus, tight credit conditions created by Reserve Bank of India would push up interest rates, and financially weak companies may not be able to borrow. Similarly, a recession may curtail order position of the organizations, and organizations that are already weak may start defaulting when their sales and income decline. These are examples of systematic forces that affect all organizations simultaneously and systematically push them towards default. You should note that these are extraordinary circumstances and would push up the normal default rate of organizations. The systematic element in default risk is more harmful to the investor than the diversifiable element. The latter can be anticipated and managed. For example, a government security can be added to the portfolio unless securities exposed to normal default risk themselves are yielding an average return that is very much in excess of the default-free securities. Liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is a type of financial risk. Liquidity risk of securities results from the inability of a seller to dispose them off except by offering price discounts and commissions. It is easy to rank assets according to liquidity. The currency unit of a country is immediately saleable at par and no discount, etc. need be given. Government securities and blue chip shares are the next highly liquid group of assets. Debt securities and equity shares of some small and less known companies are less liquid or even illiquid. Lack of liquidity forces investors to sell the securities at a price below to the existing price, particularly when the quantity to be sold is large. Investors must consider the liquidity risk factor while selecting securities. Business risk. Organizations operate in an environment which often changes, and such changes causes variation in expected income. For example, a change in government policy on fertilizer subsidy may affect a group of companies in the fertilizer industry. Similarly, an action by a competitor, domestic or from outside, may also affect other companies. While the above changes in the environment are caused by certain entities, there are several factors which change the operating environment but can't be attributed to anyone. For instance, many organizations are exposed to business cycle, and the income of such organizations significantly differs from period to period. Companies in steel, auto and shipping industries are exposed to such business cycles. It is difficult to assess whether the business risk is systematic or non-systematic. A diversified portfolio consisting of securities of several industries can diversify such business risk to a great extent. On the other hand, portfolios with few stocks or stock drawn from select industries would be exposed to such business risk if all sectors of the portfolio were affected by changes in The environment. Management risk. Management risk is that part of total variability of return which is caused by managerial decisions in organizations where owners are not managers. However qualified and capable the management team, there are chances for judgmental errors and wrong decisions. Owners, investors are rightly aggrieved when executives are paid high salaries and perks and are allowed ego-bolstering non-income consumption like luxury cars, lavishly furnished offices, and yet they plunge the organization in severe difficulties by their inept decisions. Management errors are the main reasons which give rise to management risk. Component of total investor risk. The errors are so numerous that it is difficult to either list them or even to classify them. Nevertheless, some potential areas of management errors can be highlighted. The one great blunder that management might commit is to ignore product obsolescence. In fact, adequate expenditure must be made on our diversified product lines. Another risk is the dependence of an organization on a single large customer. Management must adequately diversify customer groups. Many organizations supplying military equipment have been found caught up in deep financial distress when the government announces cuts in military spending. Many software companies are also facing this problem and making effort to diversify customers as well as country exposure. Yet one more area of management errors could be the wrong handling of a correct decision when it is subjected to unfair criticism and is even fought out in a court. For example, an automobile manufacturer develops a fuel-efficient small car much ahead of times. Some ardent consumer protection group brings a lawsuit on the grounds of user safety being threatened. The organization then announces abandonment of the product, forcing investors to bear the loss of investments and lost revenues in future. You should note that these cases are only illustrative and the list may go to an infinite number of factors. Agency theory and management risk. A recent development in the area of explaining management risks is concerned with research that seeks to explain the basic motivations of owners and managers. It has been stated that owners work harder than managers, who do not have ownership interest in an organization. Moreover, non-owner managers have strong incentives to consume non-pecuniary benefits since they are hired employees. The emerging theory hypothesizes that owner non-managers delegate all authority to non-owner managers, who then operate under a principal-agent relationship. Since ex-post rewards and punishments are not perfect and just, hired executives may not make as much ex-ante effort to generate profitable investment opportunities than they would if they owned the organization. Thus, there is a conflict of interest between owners and managers, and the latter may abuse the authority delegated to them much to the detriment of owners. In consequence, investors, who are rational individuals, would pay a higher price for shares of owner-managed organizations than for shares of employee-managed organizations. The difference between the two sets of prices has been termed as agency cost. It must be observed that the theory has not gone without criticism, but the view is getting increasingly accepted. Evaluating management. Investors and security analysts must attempt to evaluate the management team of an organization for its strengths and deficiencies. The task, though difficult and highly subjective, must be done using some vital checkpoints, which are briefly stated below. 1. Age, health, and experience profile of executives. 2. Growth orientation and aggressiveness of management. 3. Composition of board of directors and the number of outside directors. Effectiveness of the board. 4. Management depth of the organization, i.e., extent of delegation and decentralization and development of managers at all levels with a strong middle management team. 5. Dynamism and flexibility of management. 6. Dividend payout policy and cash dividend record. 7. The depth and transparency of annual reports to shareholders, corporate disclosure practices. 8. Compensation to managers including special arrangements like stock option plans. 9. Compliance record of environmental, consumer protection, and fair trade practices. 10. Extent of implementing corporate governance codes. Diversifiable and non-diversifiable elements. Management errors are instances of management weaknesses. During normal periods, they go unnoticed, but during periods of difficulty, not only are these errors conspicuously observed but also the responses of weak management become very poor. Difficulties crop up when stresses are built up for all organizations irrespective of the quality of management. For example, a shortage of petroleum products or emergence of a strong global competitor would aggravate problems and increase their number manifold. Since all organizations would be affected, the investor would have no choice to diversify. Of course, he would sell off shares of organizations with weaker management because they would be more prone to committing management errors during such stresses or systematic pressures. This would lower security prices of such organizations, and investors would hold them only if higher rates of return are offered. But while this may happen, there is no escape for the investor. If he moves from a weaker organization to an organization that is not so weak, systematic pressures would still work. Hence, this component of management risk is known as systematic or non-diversifiable risk. It must be observed that even best managers can commit errors during normal periods. This would be a case of diversifiable management risk. Normal management errors occur randomly, and investors can diversify by shifting their investments across companies. 3.5 Risk measurement. You would have also come across a statement in this unit that the standard deviation measures the total risk of an investment. The later developments in the theory of investment risk decompose this total into several of its components. And this can be done in two ways. X1, dividing total risk into systematic and unsystematic risk, and 2. Dividing total risk into parts such that each of which has an origin in some causal force. Obviously, the first part of the decomposition exercise is broad and has relation to the market. The second part of the exercise relates to the factors or causes which produce risk in investments. The division of total risk into systematic and unsystematic or non-systematic owes its origin to developments in the area of portfolio theory. Sources of risk that cause variability of returns may be perceived as belonging to two general classes: those that are pervasive and affect all securities, though in varying degrees, e.g., inflation, interest rates, market sentiment, etc., and those that are specific to a particular security, e.g., financial risk and business risk. When variability of returns moves with the market, it is recognized as systematic. Organizations cannot eliminate such a risk, and they are of major concern to the investor. For example, when prices rise, all organizations would be affected in terms of their costs and realizations, which in turn would affect variability of returns. This will be a market phenomenon and would tend to stay for all. The investor would demand compensation for this risk component in figuring out his expected rate of return. On the other hand, when variability of returns occurs because of organization-specific factors like the failure to obtain a prestigious overseas contract, or a higher exposure to the risk of default in payment of interest charges and debt obligations, the risk is termed non-systematic. Since this part of risk can be reduced through a diversified portfolio, it is not considered while computing the expected or required rate of return. Total risk. The two components of total risk are additive, and hence total risk is equal to systematic risk plus non-systematic risk. Systematic risk is normally measured by comparing the stock's performance vis-a-vis market's performance under different conditions. For example, in a good period, if the stock appreciates more than other stocks in the market, and in a bad period, it depreciates more than other stocks in the market, the systematic risk of the stock is more than the market risk. The systematic risk of the market, normally widespread market index like BSE 100 or Nifty 50 index, is equal to 1, and systematic risk of all stocks is expressed in terms of systematic risk of market index. Beta calculation. Beta factor, also known as beta coefficient, is a measure of the volatility or systematic risk of a security or a portfolio in relation to the overall market. The beta factor indicates how much the price of a security is expected to move relative to the movement of the overall market. The formula for calculating beta is beta equals covariance of the security's returns with the market's returns, variance of the market's returns. The steps to calculate beta are as follows. Gather data, collect historical data for the security's returns and the market's returns for a given period. The market return can be represented by a benchmark index, such as the S. Directions. Calculate the variance of the market's returns. Variance measures the degree of dispersion of a set of data points around their average. It represents the overall volatility of the market. Divide the covariance by the variance to get the beta coefficient. The beta of the stock is equal to beta of the regression coefficient when stocks of returns are regressed on return of market index. If the beta of stock is 1.50, then the stock is expected to show a price increase of 1.5 times of stock returns in a good period. At the same time, if the market declines by some percentage in a bad period, the stock is expected to decline 1.5 times more than market's negative returns. For illustrative purpose, the weekly price and return data BSE 100 index A, B, and C industries are taken for a period of 6 months, July 2022 to December 2022. Using the return data and regression, the beta values of the 3 individual stocks are computed. Is beta shows the lowest value and is 0.49. The stock is less volatile during the period. The market as a whole, measured through BSE 100 index, has reported a net loss of 32% during the 6 months period, whereas it has suffered a net loss of 27.60% during the same period. A week-to-week comparison shows that A suffered less or posted profit when the market was reporting loss during the week. On the other hand, C Industries reported a gain of 8.30% against the market loss of 32%. Again, a week-to-week comparison shows the C Industries weekly return are closely moving in line with BSE 100 and hence got a beta value of 0.96, which is close to market's beta of 1. B showed wide variation during the period. Against a market loss of 32%, B reported a net loss of 54.79% and also showed high volatility in the returns. The beta of 1.82 reflected the volatility. Thus, the systematic risk of A is the lowest and B is highest, whereas C Industries has shown a moderate systematic risk. The unsystematic risk of the stock is equal to total risk less systematic risk. It is computed as follows. Unsystematic risk equals variance of the stock, beta 2x variance of the market index. Sometime, the unsystematic risk is expressed as a standard deviation. For the 3 illustrative stocks, the systematic and unsystematic measures are as follows. Look at the screen. 3.7 Risk and return trade-off. An individual invests, postpones consumption, only in response to a rate of return, which must be suitably adjusted for inflation and risk. This basic postulate, in fact, unfolds the nature of investment decisions. Let us understand it. Cash has an opportunity cost, and when you decide to invest it, you are deprived of this opportunity to earn a return on that cash. Also, when the general price level rises, the purchasing power of cash declines. Larger the increase in inflation, the greater the depletion in the buying power of cash. This explains the reason why individuals require real rate of return on their investments. Now, within the large body of investors, some buy government securities or deposit their money in bank accounts that are adequately secured. In contrast, some others prefer to buy, hold, and sell equity shares even when they know that they get exposed to the risk of losing their much more than those investing in government securities. You will find that this latter group of investors is working towards the goal of getting larger returns than the first group and, in the process, does not mind assuming greater risk. Investors, in general, want to earn as large returns as possible, subject, of course, to the level of risk they can possibly bear. The risk factor gets fully manifested in the purchase and sale of financial assets, especially equity shares. It is common knowledge that some investors lose even when the securities markets boom. So there lies the risk, risk, as the probability that the actual return on an investment will be different from its expected return. Using this definition of risk, you may classify various investments into risk categories. Thus, government securities would be seen as risk-free investments because the probability of actual return diverging from expected return is zero. In the case of debentures of an organization, the probability of the actual return being different from the expected return would be very little because the chance of the organization defaulting on stipulated interest and principal repayments is quite low. You would obviously put equity shares in the category of high risk investment for the simple reason that the actual return has a great chance of differing from the expected return over the holding period of the investor, which may range from 1 day to a year or more. Investment decisions are premised on an important assumption that investors are rational and hence prefer certainty to uncertainty. They are risk averse, which implies that they would be unwilling to take risk just for the sake of risk. They would assume risk only if an adequate compensation is forthcoming. And the dictum of rationality, combined with the attitude of risk aversion, imparts to investments their basic nature. The question to be answered is, how best to increase returns with a given level of risk, or how best to reduce risk for a given level of return? Obviously, there would be several different levels of risks and different associated expectations of return. The basic investment decision would be a trade-off between risk and return. Figure 3.1 depicts the risk-return trade-off available to rational investors. The line RF/M shows the risk-return function, i.e., a trade-off between expected return and risk that exists for all investors interested in financial assets. You may notice that the RF/M line always slopes upward because it is plotted against expected return, which has to increase as risk rises. No rational investor would assume additional risk unless there is extra compensation for it. This is how his expectations are built. This is, however, not the same thing as the actual return always rising in response to increasing risk. The risk-return trade-off is figured on expected or anticipated, i.e., ex ante, return, and not on actual or realized, ex post return. Actual return will also be higher for high-risk securities if you plot long-term return of these investments. It is relatively easier to show evidence for this in debt instruments. For example, Treasury bills offers lowest return among the government securities because of their short-term nature. Government bonds with a long-term maturity offer a return higher than Treasury bills because they are exposed to interest rate risk. We will discuss more when we cover bond analysis. Corporate bonds offer a return more than government bonds because of default risk. The return ranges from 12% to 18% depending on the credit rating of the bond. The returns of all these securities are less volatile compared to equity return. The long-term return of BSE sensitive index is around 18%. You may now look at figure 3.1 to understand the relative positioning of different financial assets on the risk-return map. The point RF is the expected Return on government securities where risk is zero and is recognized as the risk-free rate. As you move on the RF_M line, you find successive points, which show the increase in expected return as risk increase. Thus, equity, shares, which carry lot more of risk than government securities and organization debentures are plotted higher on the line. Organization debentures are less risky than equity because of the mortgages and assurances made available to the investor, but more risky than government securities where the default risk is zero because government generally does not fail. They are placed between the two securities with government securities and equity shares. Warrants, options and financial futures are other specialized financial assets, ranked in order of rising risk. We shall know more about these investments in a later unit. An important point deserves attention while interpreting the risk-return trade-off of the type presented in Figure 3.1. It shows a simple fact. Financial securities are of different types and they offer different risk-return combination. The risk and return also move together. Thus, if an investor is not willing to assume any risk, he will have to be satisfied with the risk-free rate, i.e., RF, by investing the wealth in government securities. If you are not happy with 8% or 9% return of government securities, you can move to next security that offers higher return. But there is a cost associated with such higher return. Investors in corporate bonds have to bear additional risk compared to investors of government securities. One of the important sources of additional risk is default risk, since companies may fail to honor the interest and principal liability. As you move on the ladder, you can expect a higher return, but your risk also increases. Investors need to strike a balance when they allocate their wealth under various investments. If someone invests their entire savings only in government securities or only in high-risk securities like equity or derivatives, it may not yield desired result. Investors need to balance the investments by partly investing in equities and partly in government securities. The proportion of investment can be changed depending on the economic outlook. Allocation of wealth on different securities and periodical revision should be an integral part of your investment strategy. We will discuss more on this strategy in the next section as well as in a separate unit. 3.7 Summary. Considerations of risk are vital for investments. A potential investor looks at some expected return, which occurs in future. And what is certain about future is its uncertainty. A decision today for a tomorrow, which is uncertain, is the kind of topography on which an investor has to walk. The path is rugged and the journey full of risk. An intelligent investor would want to make his journey as smooth as possible. He would attempt to anticipate the kind of risks she is likely to face and also the vast number of factors that probably produce these risks. Even though he understands that his task is highly subjective, she makes her best efforts to remain anchored to canons of rationality. The two-step procedure that an investor follows in accomplishment of the objective is to get some specific insights into the total investment risk and then to familiarize with various elements and factors that sum up to such total risk. For estimating the total risk, the investor uses past experience and modifies it appropriately for the expected changes in the future and then develops a subjective probability distribution of possible returns from the proposed investment. This probability distribution is then employed to estimate the expected value of the return and its variability. The mean gives the expected value and variance, or standard deviation, gives the variability or the measure of risk. The widely used procedure for assessing risk is known as the mean variance approach. The variance, or standard deviation, provides an overview of risk. It measures total risk. In actual practice, various factors produce this total risk. A decomposition of total risk would be necessary to gain knowledge of the influence of these factors individually. Recognizing some recent developments in the theory of risk measurement, especially the portfolio aspects, a first step in reaching out to the components of total risk are to divide it into systematic or market-related risk and non-systematic or diversifiable risk. When it comes to specifying the factors influencing total risk, one may group them into two broad classes, viz. Factors, which produce non-diversifiable or systematic risk, and factors which cause non-systematic or diversifiable risk. The former category comprises causes like interest rate variations, inflation, or market sentiment, or bull-bear market, which would affect all organizations. And their measurement will be useful in estimating required rate of return. The latter category would, on the other hand, include causes like business environment, financial leverage, management quality, liquidity, and chance of default. They affect some organizations but no others. These sources of risk are expected to have minimum impact on a diversified portfolio, and hence, one need not be concerned with them too much. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.